1973 to 1976 and beyond was the final chunk in the last of the Hammer Odyssey, sadly. Over time, major upheavals in the studio's personnel, the cinema-goers' tastes changing forever, major financial backing pullouts, and the landscape of British horror cinema in general beginning to flatline meant that the studio was in trouble and took a battering from all sides. Such was the turbulence of it all. And it just meant it was simply too much for the studio. The independent productions at this time struggled enormously until eventually the big boys took over, stifling the entrepreneurs and rendering individualism to non-existence, a bit like how the internet has gone now. Join me in the last hurrah on Look, Look and Look Again as we finish off this meta-series and bid a fond farewell to the films that meant so much to so many over the years. A shout out too to those who have stuck with me. Screen Spirit, James Reed, Paul Jacks, Gary Bryant, Princess Asim, and my mum. This is for you, as it all has been really, and of course my other wonderful subscribers. My gratitude for your interest and your inspiration is simply beyond words. This is for you. January the 3rd, 1973, and filming wrapped up on the Satanic Rites of Dracula. Sir James Carreras had run out of money, using Warner Brothers' last slab of investment to churn out the final, proper Dracula film. Major distributors were now turning their back on the studio, especially those productions that were crafted on English soil. Even Hammer's competitors were struggling, with the exception of TV spin-offs, which also were beginning to flag. Michael Carreras was now Hammer's chief executive, and the strain between father and the son was pushed to its limit. On hearing his father was going to flog Hammer to Tygun, Michael approached Imperial Chemical Industries, ICI to you and me, for £40,000, roughly $500,000 in today's money, so he could have the collateral to buy Hammer outright from his father, as Michael wanted to keep the film studios in the family. Sir James Carreras accepted his son's offer and swiftly resigned from the board of directors. Alas, this was in detriment, as financial backers, keeping the company's head above water on hearing Sir James had left, pulled out. Michael decided foreign investment may be helpful, so approached Asia for backing when he liaised with Shaw Brothers, major studio behemoths in Hong Kong. From this brought two films, one being Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, and the other a thriller called Shatter. Unfortunately, both did not fare well at the box office in 1974. In Hammer Studios' 1974 annual general meeting, Michael Carreras lamented,
"In addition to the change of overall company structure and internal reorganization, the British film industry as a whole has experienced serious regression from the almost total withdrawal of traditional American distributors' production finance, at a time when British distributors had already cut back severely. In the cinemas, the current trend is for the big star name picture to attract audiences. It has proved so successful that major companies are continuing to follow this policy, with a subsequent loss of interest and shortage of finance for the less expensive middle ground picture."
By 1974, a cinematic adaptation of the popular sitcom Man About the House was produced by Hammer and very little else. Hammer now had severe cash flow issues, and the domino effect meant that the studio needed to make some of its employees redundant. Eventually, the Hammer House of Horror was run by just two, Michael Carreras and Roy Skeggs. Carreras tried once again to look at foreign backing, starting with rupees for the proposed Kali, Bride of Dracula, which would take Van Helsing to fight his sworn enemy in India. A proposed film called The Impaler was also bandied about, scribed by Doctor Who writer Brian Hells, which would have potential foreign investment from Hungary or Lou from Romania. This amounted to nothing more than a possibility, which faded. Shaka Zulu, the Black Napoleon, could be funded by South Africa, but there wasn't a rand in sight, and at a last-ditch attempt, the USA was thought of funding Don Hofton's Savage Jackboot, but the dollars had dried up. For the Impaler film, director Ken Russell was approached to direct it, but refused the collaboration, feeling the script was too coy and lacked the sex and sadism he could bring to the picture and what the audience wanted. Finally, in 1975, Michael Carreras bagged a deal with Nat Cohen of EMI and the German company Terra Filmkunst to produce another weekly adaptation, which was To the Devil a Daughter. And despite whipping up controversy with its 15-year-old star in the altogether and upping the gore, it flopped completely upon its release. In 1975, not one film was produced at a British studio. Carreras tried in earnest to pursue with projects and to whip up interest with tantalising sales pitches for a film based on a comic strip called Vampirella, as well as a King Kong-inspired creature feature called Nessie, Monster from the Past. Columbia generated some interest but pulled out, along with Japanese studio Toho. Columbia agreed to finance what is thought to be Hammer's last film, The Lady Vanishes, but pulled out during the production, and although the picture had finally gotten into the can, it left a mountain of debt. Realising he was flogging a dead horse and shattered by his fruitless endeavours, Michael Carreras, crestfallen, resigned from Hammer in 1979, the last of the true Hammer dynasty behind the movies. Shortly after Hammer went into receivership, ICI still had a vested interest and kept Roy Skeggs on, along with producer Brian Lawrence, to collect the royalties from Hammer's back catalogue. Despite this, it is in fact Skeggs and Lawrence that managed to save Hammer and took the company from the big to the little screen in the 1980s. But that, dear viewer, is another tale for another time. And now finally, on Look, Look and Look Again, the movies that reflect those topsy-turvy years. In the village of Durwood arrives dashing Captain Kronos, his hunchbacked assistant, Professor Hieronymus Grost, and feisty squeeze Carla, rescued fresh from the stocks. Kronos and his companions learn that young women are turning up dead and seemingly aged by about 70 years. Kronos has suspicions that he shares with his friends and believes this is the work of a vampirific influence, and this form of creature drains the victim's life essence. In order to catch it, a dead toad in the presence of the creature will spring back to life, indicating if the fiend is walking amongst us. Kronos sets the traps. Kronos meets up with Dr. Marcus, who has been visiting the home of Paul and Sarah Durwood and has been attending their sick, bedridden mother. Marcus finds he has been infected by a vampire, and Kronos makes several attempts to kill him. Despite valiant efforts, the Doctor finally meets his maker by being penetrated by the cross around his neck. Kronos is distraught by the death of his friend and realises that he has work to do in stopping the menace spreading even further. Using Carla as bait, Kronos goes to the Durwood estate, which he firmly believes is the source of the evil, and upon arrival he discovers a family secret which unleashes the malevolent force of the Bloodsucker, aiming to duel with Captain Kronos to the death and claim his female companion as his bride of the undead. Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter was shot over the period of 7.5 weeks. 2.5 weeks of them were location filming and 5 weeks were studio bound. The finished product did not diversify from director Brian Clemens' carefully choreographed storyboards, bringing his visual interpretation to life. Clemens went behind the lens. However, he didn't really understand the vampire concept and flaked a little when asked to direct it. In order to boost his confidence, Clemens took a hefty clutch of old-school Hammer movies about the creatures and used this as enlightenment. Kronos was initially to be a series. Clemens wanted to have the captain as a time traveller who could pop up at any time, any place to hunt the vampires down. Regrettably, this didn't transpire. After sitting through Hammer's Fanged back catalogue to nail the style of the studio that dripped blood, Clemens observed,
"It struck me that they were all the same. The same build-up, same premise, same stake in the heart."
Clemens decided to turn this on its head by presenting us with different species of vampire lore, which we would have met through the series if it had transpired. The creatures of the undead here steal the essence of youth and revive amphibians if tossed in the way of a suspected pointy-toothed parasite. Early concepts gave Kronos a gold coffin to rest in and a golden coach to travel in with his companions, but due to budgetary restrictions this didn't make it to the screen. For the male lead, Horst Janssen was cast and took to the role like a bat to blood, as not only was he an accomplished horse rider, he was a keen swordsman as well. Caroline Munro was offered the part after her debut in Dracula AD 72. Clemens wasn't too happy about being cajoled into having a part for the actress rather than casting for it himself. However, when Clemens heard Munro's naturally softly spoken tones rather than her attempts at portraying the part as a fiery female bumpkin as the original screenplay wanted, something Munro was clearly uncomfortable with, Brian Clemens felt that Munro would be ideal. Due to timing reasons, Clemens was reportedly disappointed with the sword fight at the film's climax, and regrets he could not have spent more time on it, as it didn't quite reach his standards. Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter unfortunately had a very erratic release for its distribution in the United Kingdom. It was funded by a loan from the National Film Finance Corporation, with no guaranteed marketing. Caroline Munro stumbled across the film being shown in London whilst looking in the paper, and that's how she and her family managed to see the finished product. Because of this, it definitely did not receive the recognition it deserves, but can be now looked on fondly as the last of the best for Hammer Productions. For the Hammer horror fan mag House of Hammer, Kronos cropped up in a small series of his own comic strip adventures, a taste of what we couldn't look forward to. Guess what? Captain Kronos is unavailable on Blu-ray in the UK, although a watchable print of the film can, at this current time, be sourced from YouTube for free. However, in Germany there's the Annulus release, in America there's the Shout Factory release, and in Australia Shock Entertainment brings this gem to their citizens. All are superb releases and feature different commentaries, which provide fascinating insight into the making of the movie. In my opinion, Captain Kronos is an absolute treasure. The flipping of vampire lore and giving it a new angle is a brave move, but Clemens goes for it, and for me, it worked. There are some outstanding sequences. I thought the vampire brushing past flowers in their long cloak, only to leave a trail of dead ones once they've sashayed by them, is a true highlight for me. We also have reliable Hammer regular John Carson, cult actress Wanda Ventham, and John Cater playing the Hunchback, giving superb performances. Shane Bryant pops up in this, his third Hammer outing, despite being relegated to a small now and again part. Ian Hendry crops up as bad lad Kero, who was allegedly pissed throughout the production. Hendry accepted the role as he was desperately looking for work. Clemens said that Ian Hendry
needed the work because he was a piss artist. It was only a 3-day part, but a very important part. I spoke to him and said, "Ian, you will be good, won't you?" He said, "I'll lay off the booze totally." When I went into makeup the next day at 7:30 in the morning, he had a lager in his hand. I said, "I thought you were going to lay off." He said, "This isn't booze. This is lager."
This main and supporting cast ensures we have a stylish swashbuckler, sodden with the trappings of gothic fantasy, and compelling enough to absorb you from the start to the very end of the film. This is kind of like Avengerland's foray into horror and reunites the men behind the TV programme. Brian Clemens directs and produces alongside his business partner Albert Fennell, and even Laurie Johnson provides the score, who, as we know, gave us the marvellous Avengers main theme. It would have been great to see Kronos and his friends join forces with Steed in fighting against a criminal organisation of vampires, wouldn't it? Captain Kronos is quirky, dark-humoured, fun and fantastical with just the right amount of menace. And so it gets a 9 out of 10 from me.
Your letter urges to make all speed, but gave no reason.
Young girls suddenly become greatly aged. Is that sufficient reason?
And these girls, they died with blood upon their lips?
Yes, why?
Vampires.
What? No, it can't be.
What he doesn't know about vampirism wouldn't fill a flea's codpiece.
Vampires. Dr. Marcus, it is commonly supposed that a vampire attacks in only one way, by biting the neck and draining the victim of blood.
But that's true.
The girls you spoke of, they were not drained of blood, but of youth.
(1973), and at Pelham House, several wealthy bigwigs and MPs are taking part in black mass rituals. Surveying these clandestine perverse gatherings at Pelham is Police Inspector Murray, who gets in touch with his old friend Lorimer Van Helsing, who he knows is an expert in the field of the occult after the events a year or so earlier. In a photograph shown to him by Murray, Van Helsing recognises one of the clandestine visitors who frequents Pelham and identifies him as Julian Keeley, an expert in biological weapons and germ warfare. Keeley eventually commits suicide after revealing to Van Helsing he is working on a new deadlier variant of Bacillus pestis, the bubonic plague. At Pelham House, Van Helsing's granddaughter Jessica discovers a cellar of chained-up vampire women and almost joins them. Van Helsing then discovers a research is being funded by multi-millionaire D.D. Denham, who is revealed to be none other than Count Dracula. Dracula intends to release the plague onto the world on November the 23rd, appropriately the day of the Sabbath of the Dead, and in turn wipe out humanity. Dracula also kidnaps Jessica and intends to make her his bride. Can Van Helsing and his friends stop the apocalypse orchestrated by the arch-vampire himself? As for the final time, Dracula attempts his ultimate revenge. Prior to shooting in early 1973, this final entry into the Dracula meta-franchise for Hammer was painstakingly titled Dracula is Dead and Well and Living in London. Thank God they changed it. Christopher Lee was adamant that this was it, after being persuaded by so many over a long period of time to return again and again and again. Locked in contract, Lee played the part under protest and said prior to shooting,
"I'm doing the next one under protest. I think it's fatuous. I can think of 20 adjectives. Fatuous. Pointless. Absurd. It's not a comedy, but it's a comic title. I don't see the point. I don't see what they hope to achieve. I just hope they, the audience, realize that I am struggling against insuperable odds on occasion to remain faithful to the author's original character."
Lee managed to get one original line and a few based on others written by Stoker in the movie, just as he achieved in Dracula AD 1972.
My revenge has spread over centuries and has just begun!
Co-star Joanna Lumley recalled the staking scene, censored from most prints, including all the VHS releases, only to be thankfully reinstated later for the Blu-ray treatment. And squelchingly divine it is too. One of the most memorable sequences, iconic for this film, involved actress Valerie Van Ost in the role of faithful Secretary Jane. Of it, Lumley said,
"A metal brace encircled her chest, with an indentation in the front in which was inserted one end of the stake. The stake was telescopic like a stage dagger. As it drove into a blood bag, filled with Kensington gore, burst, and she howled like a wolf. A visitor to the set had to be helped away. It looked so realistic."
At the time, Warner Brothers did not bother with releasing the movie in the States. The Satanic Rites of Dracula was eventually released several years later, in late 1978, stateside by distributor Dynamite, with the lame retitling of Dracula and his Vampire Bride. Until recently, this murky print was doing the circuits. The video versions fared better in print quality, but featured the censored version. Christopher Lee bowed out completely, and in 1974 said,
"I will not play that character anymore. I no longer wish to do it. I no longer have to do it, and I no longer intend to do it. It is now part of my professional past, just one of the roles I have played in a total of 124 films."
Upon its release, the Financial Times waspishly stated,
"From what inspirational abyss Hammer dredged up the script for their latest Dracula film, one trembles to think. Fortunately, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing are on hand to lend the film what little dignity it has."
Director Alan Gibson decides to reunite some of the cast from his Dracula AD 1972 film, Lorimer Van Helsing, his granddaughter Jessica, and Inspector Murray. This time Jessica is played by Lumley instead of Beecham, so of sorts this could be considered as something of a companion piece. Houghton plays for straight here and presents us with the Count being taken down to earth a bit and treated with sinister respect. Although there are a few anomalies, like how the Count managed to get so rich so quickly, and after his previous decapitation in Dracula AD 72, how he was revived. But this is Hammerland, after all, and the film tries not too hard to delve in the past, and with this, Gibson focuses purely on the present. The Satanic Rites of Dracula can be seen in high definition from Warner Brothers archives in a UK and American release. Alas, it is spartan with the extras, as is Dracula AD 1972 Blu-ray release from them as well. However, considering the scarcity of a decent print for this movie for many, many years, the print here enables us to view this from a whole new perspective, and is a worthy addition to your Hammer library, for sure. Another glorious comic strip stab at the Count's nefarious adventures in a modern-day setting, courtesy of Alan Gibson. The in-joke of property developers being the vampires of the land is understood and very tongue-in-cheek in what is, in my opinion, a superb swan song for the Count. This is your atypical Friday night Hammer movie that I recall was syndicated regularly between the BBC and ITV, and it did leave a impression on me when I caught it, especially the black mass scenes where they finally have got it right. The screenplay by Don Houghton, known for the grittier elements to stories of Jon Pertwee's Doctor Who, namely Mind of Evil and the absolutely classic Inferno, Satanic also has that feel to it, as the characters are put through their paces and can have a rough time of it all, really. It's evident through the mise-en-scène that Houghton and Gibson collaborated very well indeed, as it doesn't hold back on the violence or the menace. This is certainly Dracula for the sheepskin coat and bell-bottom age, and despite the odd bit of whimsy, is nowhere near as lighter in tone as Dracula AD 1972. All the characters here are generally likeable, and the death of Inspector Torrance, played by William Franklin, who was the 1970s TV and film regular and distinctive face of the "Shh, you know who" commercials, it's genuinely annoying when he gets bumped off, as he's one of the goodies that you hope soldiers on until the very end. Alan Gibson goes for a very foggy and chilly feel to the atmospherics, and it pays off as it gives the whole essence to the picture, a certain frigidity. It looks as though many a cold morning was spent in and around South Kensington, and all the better for it being shot in wide-angled lens. Other scenes, such as Peter Cushing's erudite Van Helsing passing the Albert Hall to make way for Elveston Place, and it's this scene Gibson accomplishes spot-on eeriness by reducing the hustle and bustle typical to that area to an absolute minimum, ensuring he gets a visual ghostliness from a contemporary landscape. Gibson also ups the action a bit, with hordes of security thugs menacing the heroes, tearing around the countryside or city on motorbikes, confronting and dealing with anyone that knows too much and could scupper their employer's plans. These are quite nasty bastards. For his final outing, Dracula goes into Death Wish mode, as it's obvious if the plague wipes out all of humanity, it would then dry up the food supply needed for the good old Count, so ultimately the Count would eventually perish too, and with no blood to revive him either. Poor forlorn Dracula does become a satanic tyrant of the world after all, but is king of nothing. And the pure irony is that Dracula in this film clearly can't live with humans whom he despises, but in torment realises he can't live without them either. This seems, when we look at it, to reflect Christopher Lee's sentiments at putting a final end to his Count incarnation once and for all. Despite a bit of crotchety from Lee, his performance here is unaffected and quite chilling, as Dracula is presented as an apocalyptic business megalomaniac whose delusion thrives on the thought of annihilation of the human race, as they have made him into such a misanthropist. A little on the downside is the Count's introductory shadowy disguise, which could have been executed better. So with some slight anachronisms and a few tweaks needed here and there, but not too many, and running the risk of burying finer points of the plot in the film's big dread, The Satanic Rites of Dracula is a movie I could watch again and again. True, it does stir up a bit of nostalgia, so there might be a slight bias on my part, but it also helps me reappreciate this and its companion piece Dracula AD 1972, and to me has revealed another understated gem. Dracula gets a total of 9 Satanic Rites out of 10 from me. Dr. Simon Helder arrives at a lunatic asylum in Carlsbad. He is being committed and believed to be criminally insane by the authorities after he is found experimenting on corpses and assisting the local body snatcher to obtain them. Helder learns at the asylum that it once incarcerated Baron Frankenstein, Helder's inspiration in the work that he does. However, he is told the Baron died there, but the asylum director remains secretive about the circumstances. Helder is assaulted by two of the asylum staff and is attended to his wounds by the waif-like Angel, a mute girl who assists the mysterious Dr. Victor. Helder finally realizes that Dr. Victor is in fact Baron Frankenstein, who runs the asylum, using it as a front to continue with his ghastly experiments. This time, instead of rotting cadavers, Frankenstein has access to more fresher meat when he begins targeting the inmates of Bedlam, harvesting for body parts in order to build a creature. Helder eagerly agrees to become Frankenstein's assistant and assists him in constructing a living hirsute monster. Frankenstein begins to rely on Helder, as his hands were severely burned in a fire, rendering them useless. Despite transferring the brain of a professor into the creature, the feral nature of the criminal instinct takes over the beast, and it starts a rampage where the asylum is plunged into utter chaos, as its creators, Frankenstein and Dr. Helder, need to battle against the monster's brute force, as well as its obsession with broken glass, which it delights in using to dispatch its victims. The final Baron Frankenstein movie for Hammer sees Peter Cushing return in this his sixth outing. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell featured a few other poignant lasts, especially Terence Fisher, the director, who had in fact directed all bar one of the Cushing vehicles. It was a proposal to him in a pub that generated Fisher's interest in getting back behind the lens, his confidence severely knocked after 2 road traffic accidents. Fisher took the plunge though, and found not only it was good for his self-esteem, but also for Cushing, whose involvement was not only essential to the film, but for Cushing's well-being too, as it provided him with a welcome distraction as he was still racked with grief over the loss of his wife. Fisher had worked collaboratively with Cushing and believed this brought the cycle of films full circle. Terence Fisher explained that the Baron
started with a great ideal to produce a perfect being. He went through many failures because he's always got to fail, and at the end of Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell he says, and I quote, "I am the creator of man."
Fisher concluded,
"You've had so many monsters by then, that at least you can say where this monster has come from. He comes from hell, from evil, from which Frankenstein's mistaken belief that he is the creator of man, which, of course he isn't, and will never succeed in being."
Fisher died in 1980, with this movie being his last. Roy Skeggs wanted Caroline Munro for the role of Angel, but she was still tied in with Captain Kronos, so Madeline Smith got the part. Smith was not a newcomer to the Hammer family, as we know, and was delighted to be reunited with Cushing again after they both appeared in 1970's The Vampire Lovers. Smith, however, was very concerned over Cushing's health and the change in him since the death of his wife. As most of the cast, Madeline Smith noticed how pale and gaunt the actor had become. This melancholy can be seen in Cushing's performance. David Prowse dons the hirsute body effects to become the monster. Shane Bryant made it known that he wasn't too happy with it and thought it was rather plastic, and neither was Terence Fisher. Bryant believed that the costume looked too fake. This is also Shane Bryant's last film for Hammer, and here he plays yet again another unhinged character, but this time the mania is underwhelming rather than hysterical, and Bryant proved he is good at both. Character actors John Stratton as the twitchy, perverted asylum director and Clifford Millison playing the stoic judge although in Millicent's case briefly, are superb additions, as well as a sturdy cast of actors supporting the main leads, such as Patrick Troughton and Bernard Lee, to name but a few. In November 1972, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell gained an X certificate by the British Board of Film Censors. However, the UK censors demanded some pruning. The asylum director's death scene and the tearing of the beastie to pieces needed to be censored for British sensibilities. There was also the result of a glassing of one of the victims in the asylum, which was thought to be used only for a publicity still until the actual film sequence came to light abroad. Another contentious scene snipped from most prints is where the Baron uses his teeth to clamp a bloody sinew in place. Some reports say that the blood used in this scene was real, adding a touch of cinema verite for the gorehounds amongst the audience. When the movie reached America, it was censored even further to secure an R rating. Fortunately, over time, all the contentious footage was sourced from various prints and lengths, resulting in the one we have now being the full, uncensored film. Icon Home Entertainment does the UK release proud, with not only presenting two films in different aspect ratios, but a few decent features come along with the uncensored high-definition print too. All of the releases, at home and abroad, are decent, and for this Hammer movie, you really are spoiled for choice. Alas, I found the final Frankenstein film to be rather disappointing, rather a downbeat affair as well, that if you take away the things it's most remembered for, to me I found it on the dull and sombre side. Of course, Peter Cushing is resplendent, as he always is, and carrying on directly from Frankenstein must be destroyed by highlighting the fact his hands can't be used till they're damaged in the fire, and the fact he wears a wig due to his hair being frazzled in the inferno. Cushing wasn't that happy about the hairpiece and said it made him look like actress Helen Hayes. However, it could be said that the Baron could also be trying to capture, for the last time, his younger days, including a reference to the first Frankenstein movie. There's some in-house slices of nostalgia that can be identified when they crop up. On the contemporary front, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell ups the gore and doesn't fail too much when these things happen. The glassing, a particularly nasty piece of violence, is one such instance, although it still is brief. I found Fisher's direction of interest, it has to be said, and I like the focus on a rather dowdy and draining colour palette. The graveyard scene is imbibed with a blue hue. There is also a drab greyness of the institution, I noted, and the secret lab sequences featured a bleached emerald veil of colour. A shade of green also echoed in the clothes when surgery is being conducted. This adds to a dispiriting atmosphere. I simply found this last hurrah a little on the sluggish side, and it seems no matter how many times I tried, I ended up sound asleep, until I eventually persevered, and after the experience felt it was all so-so, moping in its own melancholy. Unfortunately, this just doesn't seem to hold my interest, no matter how many times I've tried, and although some scenes are gruesome enough to perk you up a bit with anticipated revulsion, for me it seemed I took a bloody long hike through the duration of the movie to get directly to these sanguinary points. Is one to persevere with, and out of all the Frankenstein movies, is the one I found the most difficult to get through, although there are some highlights. I expected it to be, and it could have been, so much more. Still better than the evil of Frankenstein, though. If you soldier on with it, though, there are a few rewards amongst the lengthy chit-chat and sluggish gothic dour, and despite this being the end of the meta-franchise, there is a glimmer of optimism at the end of the movie that Frankenstein could return. However, the misfortunes of Hammer films dictated otherwise. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell gets 8 surgical spirits out of 10 from me, so doesn't fare that badly.
But next time.
Next time?
Of course. We'll discuss the details later. For the moment, we must get this place tidied up so that we can start afresh. Now, we should need new material, naturally. Herr Adler in 106, perhaps? No? Oh, well, no matter. There's plenty of time to decide that. Plenty of time.
As we mentioned at the beginning, the other Hammer projects during this time were 1973's Holiday on the Buses, the last in the trilogy based on a sitcom. In this romp, we get to watch Stan and Jack getting hired to drive the bus for a holiday camp. The arrival of Stan's family generates more of the same guffaws as witnessed in the previous two screen outings.
Swim, can't you?
It's Monachini. I've lost the bottom half of it.
You what? Everybody out, come on. Nobody's allowed in this pool till this lady's coming up.
Oh, Tommy, what's right? What'd you blow the whistle for? What's happened? Oh, my God. It's like the moon coming over the mountains.
1973 also saw Love Thy Neighbour transferring from the small screen to the big one, and provides an outdated way of how we see the foreign folk with an island mentality. Hugely popular at the time, the sitcom sees Jack Smethurst providing the working class racist slurs, whilst a sparring partner Rudolph Walker fires middle class racist slurs back at him as a black couple moves next door to a white couple. After a while, the playground name calling of the nig-nog and honky variety does grate a little bit due to its repetition, whether you are shocked by the outdated language or not. But there are some mildly amusing moments about perception, stereotypes, and our genuine social beliefs, which at the time were blinkered by our provinciality as an island.
How's it coming along?
Mr. Granger, don't worry. We'll try our best to get the order finished on time.
Do you think you can manage it?
Oh, most definitely. Even if we have to work like blacks.
You black scum! How did you lot get in?
We came through the loading bay.
Here. Jacko was supposed to be picking him then.
Wait till I see Jacko. He'll be suspended for this.
Get up the hole.
Hey, you're a bit late, Eddie.
Help! Somebody! Everybody!
The series Man at the Top was also big in the early 1970s, and Hammer saw to it that this social drama of a northern man trying to make it down south in the shady world of business hit the big screen, except pushing the boundaries and showing a bit more tit and ass than permissible on television. A nifty little stab at the drama genre starring Kenneth Haig from the original series and Nanette Newman, who you think bears all, but is in fact a body double.
So, your office now.
What if I refuse?
It'd be a shame to lose all those fringe benefits, especially at your age. How many kids you got at university? It's worth thinking about. His lordship values loyalty.
I wonder what made him hire a dirty little shit like you.
1974 saw Man About the House, and it put Robin Tripp and George and Mildred on the big screen. Man About the House was a sitcom about the mishaps of three flatmates, and scandalously for the time had the setup having a man sharing with two trendy young women, one with a head screwed on, the other goofy. I enjoyed the series immensely, and the film isn't half bad either.
Is that the game where you try to huff people?
No, that's drafts.
Oh, well, then I can't play chess.
Aren't you?
Well, you see, it's a very simple game. But first of all, you must find out the value of the pieces, you see. Now, say, for instance, here we have a pawn.
Pawn?
Pawn, that's right. And that's worth a pair of tights, see?
Mm-hmm.
Here we have a bishop, and that's That's got to be worth a skirt. Hmm? And here, we have the Queen.
Queen.
Queen, yes. And that's got to be worth, well, we'll sort that out some other time. But you see, the whole object of the game is to try to mate.
Finally, 1974 saw the film Shatter, which had Stuart Whitman playing the lead as a hitman Shatter who was hiding in Hong Kong before he takes out an African leader. When a crime syndicate learns of his whereabouts, Shatter enlists the help of some kung fu fighters to support him. Excellent fight sequences and, quite frankly, a decent little bit of action make Shatter an above-average hire killer thriller.
It must have been something you said.
Police?
My name's Ratwood. Security Division, actually.
Same thing.
I suppose so, technically speaking. Doesn't really matter. Shatter? You're marked Shatter. You're wearing a neon sign. A great embarrassment to a lot of people.
Am I?
The last plane out of Kai Tak Airport tonight leaves for Manila at 8:28. Be on it. Or any flight before. But don't be here in the morning. Or we'll have you floating face downwards in the harbor. I promise. Oh no, I shouldn't bother to get up if I were you. They'll only knock you down again.
1880, Transylvania, and Carr, a Chinese disciple of Count Dracula, makes his way to Dracula's castle. Carr aims to make a deal with Dracula to help him resurrect the 7 golden vampires in China. Dracula agrees, but kills Carr by absorbing his soul and persona, so he is now free to roam the earth and heads to the Far East. 24 years later, in 1904, Chungking, Professor Van Helsing lectures Chinese students on the fable of the 7 golden vampires and informs them he's 99% certain the legend is real. The students scoff at the professor, believing him to be a fantasist, and is also taking the piss out of them. Bar one, Shi Chang, who informs the professor the brave man who tried to rid the vampire menace was his grandfather, and the events actually took place at Ping Kui, his ancestral home. Cheng gives him a golden bat medallion as further proof that this fable is 100% true, wiping any doubt from Van Helsing's mind. At a party, Leyland, Van Helsing's son, is smitten with Vanessa Buren, a wealthy widow. Buren attracts the attention of a Tong leader who desires her. Spurning his advances, they leave the party, but are attacked by the Tong leader's minions. Both are saved by 2 men skilled in their respective martial arts. Van Helsing learns that the 2 men who saved Leyland and Vanessa are brothers of Shi Chang, who has been keeping an eye on Van Helsing and his son whilst they stay in Chungking. Shi Chang asks Van Helsing if he would help him defeat the vampires, save his ancestral village, and prevent the menace from spreading further. Van Helsing agrees, with the funding for the expedition covered by Vanessa. However, the journey is treacherous and perilous, rife with bandits in a lawless, desolate terrain. After one ordeal after another, Van Helsing and his friends finally face off with fanged creatures of the undead and their past victims, now a legion of skeletal zombies, putting all their lives in jeopardy, which culminates in an epic showdown of intense martial arts skills and horror between fast-fisted heroes, a platoon of crazy cadavers, and their murderous, bloodthirsty masters. Michael Carreras searched high and low for foreign backing for the studio to continue. with the possibility of future co-productions with foreign investment. He managed to strike a deal with Shaw Brothers, the Hong Kong equivalent of Warner Brothers, to put you in the picture. Shaw Brothers Studios ran from 1925 to 2011 and made some superb pictures and offered a variety of genres to its cinema-going audiences. However, with Shaw Brothers, they don't hold back on the nasty stuff, and when they go for adult audiences, they present adult-orientated shocks without sparing the horses. Shaw brought must-see classics such as the action-packed Chinese historical Come Drink With Me in 1966, and a year later the One-Armed Swordsman trilogy, which are absolute classics. On the flip side, they produced some real sleaze with films such as Killer Snakes. This film comes highly recommended, but is best avoided by those who are fond of reptiles. It's basically like the film Willard, but on steroids, as a loner and wounded snakes turn on the people who have made their life so shitty. Another Shaw Brothers exploitational gem is Bamboo House of Dolls, which plays out as a sort of cross between Ilse She-Wolf of the SS and BBC TV's Tenko. Shaw Brothers ensures it really shows us the cruelty of the Nipponese, and being from a major studio, expect high-polished exploitation. Another If You Have the Constitution is Shaw Brothers' harrowing drama Lost Souls from 1980. Now this is directed by the infamous Men Behind the Sun director Mao Tong-fei. Lost Souls tells the story of three young adults trying to flee from China's oppression to the freedom of Hong Kong. Unfortunately, the three youths are caught by a human trafficker who pushes human degradation to its zenith. If you have a moment to look at Shaw Brothers' amazing back catalogue of movies, you won't be disappointed. It's a wealth of oriental gems, guaranteed kung fu action all the way, and at times can produce films that are especially jaded. Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires was made back-to-back with Shatter, and this was also made with Shaw Brothers' investment and features Cushing's very last appearance in a Hammer film. The recasting of Dracula, now Lee refused outright to have anything to do with it, resulted in John Forbes Robertson taking up the mantle briefly. He's unusually theatrical in appearance, and his makeup lurid enough to veer into a pantomime character, a cross between Count Yorga and Wishy Washy. His incarnation was described a little more succinctly in Melody Maker as an old queen whose makeup is run. I see their point. Whether Forbes Robertson may have cropped up in Hammer's other Dracula future productions we shall never know, as Hammer Films played with the idea of other Dracula vehicles if this one proved successful. They had ideas for Kali, Devil Bride of Dracula, which saw Van Helsing tackle a thuggy cult in the Himalayas led by the King of Undead himself. Then there was the insatiable thirst of Dracula that would have featured the winner of a national talent contest in the lead, or perhaps the film called The Dracula Odyssey, which was going to be a quartet of stories featuring the Count throughout history, cropping up in a variety of places and times. These were never pursued after concept. The production wasn't a happy affair by all accounts. Stages were not soundproofed and were mainly in tin huts, which made director Roy Ward Baker pissed off, as the sound had to be extensively redubbed. Ward Baker and his film crew also got lost in locations which were difficult to find due to their desolate and vague barren locality. There were also financial wrangles, nearly folding up the whole project. The fight sequences were not up to scratch according to Shaw Brothers, which was of no surprise to the British crew, as Shaw Brothers wanted to use their own crew to film the fight sequences in the first place. Ward Baker dug his heels in and refused outright pursuing with directing the whole shebang. Therefore a second unit was formed who shot additional martial arts scenes. There were also murmurings that the British crew were derogatory to their Chinese counterparts from Shaw Brothers, so like most productions for Hammer around this period, it was fraught with bicker and belligerence. General distribution was very higgledy-piggledy. Warner Brothers, who picked up the distribution rights stateside, were happy enough with the end result, and the movie did quite well, bringing in decent revenue in the United Kingdom and Singapore. However, Warner put the brakes on distributing the movie in the United States, where a bastardized version of it came to light in 1979, where it was recut extensively and pushed out to the drive-in circuits, known glibly as The Seven Brothers Meet Dracula. I would love to see both versions in high definition. The film did suffer cuts in the UK and USA, but fortunately these have been reinstated since. Well, I'm gutted to say this, and mightily disappointed that Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires is not distributed in the UK on Blu-ray. The only release we have currently is on the Shout Factory label in the United States. It has a handful of welcome extras, and is the only way we can see it at the moment. Now, if Arrow Films or 88 Films picked this one up and gave it the whistle and bells treatment it deserves, I would be over the moon. In my opinion, this has to be one of Hammer's best and one of my personal favourite films in general. I love Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. Come on, high-octane martial art action, zombies, vampires, nudity, gore, exploitation, and a nifty little screenplay courtesy of Don Houghton means this to me is bona fide Hammer's last hurrah, pulling out all the stops. A jumble of genres ensures this 90-odd minutes of purely trashy pleasure is a highly enjoyable watch. It's grade A hokum as Legend brings the comic strip to life. It has an oldie-worldy but otherworldly charm, and what you end up with is a hybrid unique to Hammer and possibly to many in the Western audience at the time. One of the main influences of this film, of course, is 1973's The Way of the Dragon, which had captured the UK's imagination, despite at the time the Brits getting a severely censored print, shamefully cut to ribbons. But it was still enough to spark an interest in Far Eastern culture. The East meets West fusion worked perfectly for me. The vampires here are wonderfully grotesque and have qualities and movement that echo those brilliant Blind Dead films made in Spain. And I could not fail to mention another bonus, the zombies, hopping in an amusing but also eerie way. Their initial emergence is classic as they literally burst from the ground wielding pitchforks and hose lit by a silvery green hue. Roy Ward Baker brings us bold primary colours where greens, blues and reds clash in the background whilst the cast clash frantically in front of it. Wonderfully lit, like a ghost train. David Chang is likeable enough, and the grandfather and grandson bond between both of him and Van Helsing is endearingly warm, as all of the cast is really, ensuring you actually care about our heroes. Brief scenes showing the clan cohesively becoming a family provides just enough of a breather and a bit of respite before you are plunged into the next high-octane battle sequence. Finally, the score is also dramatically bombastic, with an oriental air, conducted by the now legendary Hammer composer James Bernard, filling the soundtrack with a sense of urgency and a thundering, gut-punchy fanfare of perfect dread. Legend gets 10 golden vampires out of 10, and hell's up there with The Devil Rides Out as one of the studio's very best. John Verney, a celebrated novelist of the occult, is approached by Henry Beddoes at a launch party of his latest book. Beddoes pleads with Verney to support his daughter Catherine, who is due to arrive in the UK from her convent home in Bavaria. Beddoes believes his daughter is in danger from a coven of Satanists. Beddoes adds that someone with Verney's knowledge may be able to protect his daughter from the power of the cult. Verney agrees to take the girl into hiding along with the help of his agent Anna and her boyfriend David. At the convent, acolytes of the demon Astaroth, the sinister Father Rayner and his entourage use the black arts to unite telepathically with Catherine so she escapes back into their clutches. Verney averts the situation and meets with the bishop who excommunicated Rayner some 20 years ago. Rayner was found guilty of engaging in blasphemy by worshipping the demon Astaroth. As Verney pries further into the satanic cult, so he and Catherine are pitted against the powers of dark forces, resulting not only in jeopardizing the lives of those close to him, but for their very souls. This is the third adaptation by Hammer from a Dennis Wheatley novel, and possibly influenced by the rise in popular Catholic versus curses craze, epitomised in films such as The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby. To the Devil a Daughter is a late addition to the Beelzebub genre, directed by Peter Sykes. Financing was provided by German company Terra Filmkunst, which meant Hammer had its biggest budget for a feature film, totalling about £1 million, which is about 6.3 million adjusted for inflation. Richard Chamberlain, Vincent Price, Stacey Keach and Richard Dreyfuss were mooted for the part of Verney, but either proved unavailable or just simply too expensive. Richard Widmark was eventually hired. Originally, the story was due to be part of a project to bring all of Wheatley's novels to the television, entitled The Devil and All His Works, but like most at this time got no further than the concept stage. Issues bubbled up in production, proving a headache for Sykes, who recalled,
"We just couldn't get the script right. After each day's filming we would sit up until midnight working on the next day's script. Richard Widmark would be given his script and makeup every morning. He called us Mickey Mouse Productions. I don't blame him in a way. In the second week of shooting he called me at 4 a.m. one morning and told me he was getting the flight to Los Angeles. I managed to get to him by 6 a.m., sat on the end of his bed, and persuaded him to stay. He did the same next week. And I went to him again. When it happened again, I ignored him."
The film was shot on location in London, Elstree and High Wycombe, with some beautiful sequences on a lake in Munich provided by Filmkunst. Michael Carreras, usually there to offer guidance, was busy trying to drum up trade in the United States for his proposed Vampirella project. His input in stability management was sorely needed as production in the UK began to spiral out of control. Roy Skeggs said,
"I didn't see Michael on the set for one moment during that picture. I was shooting round the script, I had the unions on my back, it was an absolute nightmare."
The biggest issue was the ending of the film, which Sykes lamented he just couldn't get right. Initially and filmed accordingly was the evil priest Rayner going to die via metamorphosis, turning into an array of creatures before he perishes. The producers felt that this sort of thing had been done to death and was terribly old hat, and so the version we see ends abruptly, a build-up to the moment as the maelstroms of hell break loose and Lee simply gets knocked out by a rock, and that's it. Dennis Wheatley was thoroughly disappointed by the adaptation, and Wheatley, as well as Christopher Lee, were also disgusted by the freaky fetus sequences, with special repugnancy felt whilst watching the gruesome demon baby birth sequences. Lee bemoaned,
"That hideous bloody puppet clawing its way out of the woman's belly should never have been shown."
Plans for a film translation of his book The Satanist were mooted, and that it would feature Britt Ekland and Christopher Lee, but this never surfaced, and knowing how Dennis Wheatley felt about To the Devil a Daughter, even if the funds had been there, he would have probably prohibited it. When the film was released, review magazine Films Illustrated said of the movie,
"Scissors have perhaps snipped away some of the excessive bloodshed. The scenes of tortuous satanic childbirth are indeed nauseating, but some of the storyline clarity has been sacrificed in the process. But director Peter Sykes dresses it all up with a certain visual style, and the ration of horrors is sparse but effective. One does wonder, however, just what went wrong with an ending that is rushed and tamely anticlimactic."
To the Devil a Daughter was released on the 4th of March 1976 to poor reviews. Another death knell for the picture was that the US decided to poorly distribute and market it. The picture bombed and ended on a low note. The studio that dripped blood had finally run out of corpuscles, and their legacy of horror, which ushered in the golden age of the British horror science fiction film and fantasy film, stops here, abruptly. Also echoing what was happening to the British horror film in general by the mid-1970s. Studio Canal in the UK have brought a decent high-definition release, and Shout Factory stateside does exactly the same job. Either of these versions will suffice if you wish to see this, the last of the classic Hammer horror canon, a fantastic film. To the Devil a Daughter isn't that good a movie, and I found it to be very disappointing indeed. The convoluted plot is far too heavy for the light-weightedness needed for marketing appeal, so what we get is a film that is trying to tell us so much more, but says very little. I appreciate the issues surrounding the movie, but the lack of fluidity ensures the picture moves jarringly from one set piece to another until it reaches a highly subdued climax. Natasha Kinski, inherited by Hammer due to the behest of Filmkunst funding, is a terrible choice, devoid of emotion, and Kinski's dub-over doesn't help one jot. Widmark is okay, and just goes through the motions, but the appearance of Honor Blackman and Anthony Valentine really saves the picture, along with Sir Christopher Lee's performance as Father Rayner in one of his most chillingly effective deliveries of a twisted priest, warped in mind as he is indeed. Despite this, for me, the movie doesn't rise above average. David Watkins' direction of photography is gritty and brings stark realism to the proceedings, which is a positive, but Peter Sykes' direction is very two-dimensional. The Musique Concrète score by Paul Glass is an interesting experiment and another testament to the change that Hammer are striving for, and its scrapey strings and choral moanings are satisfactory in highlighting the modernity of this production, if nothing else. It doesn't really feel like a Hammer production, to be honest with you. This film is as coldly Teutonic than forebodingly bucolic as we're used to in their previous Hammer productions. Once you sort out the convoluted Avatar angle, it makes for a better understanding, but it takes a few viewings to fathom it all out. A fragmented and fractured yarn that echoes the disorder of those behind it. Annoyingly, it represents a film that could have been so much more than what it actually is. To the Devil a Daughter gets a 5 out of 10 from me, and rounds off 21 years of a heritage of horror.
Hello. Henry? The cord. Henry, we've always been very close, haven't we? We're very close now. Don't you feel that? We're so close that I can hear your pulse beating. It's beating very fast, Henry. Too fast. I don't think you have very long to live. Where is Catherine?
She's with Verney, John Verney.
You will have to speak a little more clearly, Henry.
John Verney!
Verney. Thank you, Henry.
Well, that's it, dear viewer. The whole Hammer kit and caboodle covered by Look, Look and Look Again. Remember, next time you watch a Hammer film, you are viewing a piece of British celluloid history, and upon reappreciation that I've done in making these programmes, especially seeing the movies in high definition, it's clearly evident it's something to celebrate. An institution reflecting a time when the UK influenced the horror genre around the globe. Can you believe it? Before we were browbeaten by the Orwellian woke and counterculture people that now try to influence us into thinking that pride in your country is an act of fascism, this island managed to set trends and did not follow them. I hope one day a distributor in the UK can bring us those missing gems that make up the whole picture on Blu-ray for Hammer Films, all in their high-definition glory and alongside feature-packed information, providing the whole package. It's what Hammer Films rightly deserve for looking after the horror fans all that time. Thanks ever so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed sharing the experience with me. I am knackered, but happy knowing that I have brought enjoyment to those who have grown up with Hammer, and hoping I may have influenced a whole new load of people who may be future fans. And there was me thinking this Hammer Odyssey was going to be a two-parter, realising that to do justice we need to spend more time with the studio's output, and the amount of information from different sources was vast, very vast indeed. So a huge thank you for sticking with me. Don't forget to subscribe if you like what I do, as it keeps me wanting to share my passion with you. Until next time on Look, Look and Look Again, cheerio.
Yeah.